There are three types of variables that are involved in an experiment. There is, of course, the variable that gets manipulated, the independent variable. There are confounding variables. Those are those variables that the researcher may not have thought of as being present and competing for the explanation with the independent variable. And then there's the dependent variable, and this is the factor that's measured. So when we look at, let's say, the effect of caffeine on heart rate, we would look at the level of the heart rate as a result of people having taken in caffeine. And that level of that heart rate, that would be our dependent variable. So if we look at a particular situation, this might make it easier to understand some of the things I've been talking about. So let's say that a researcher is interested in the impact of breast milk on later intelligence scores. What would happen is they would have two groups of infants, one group that is actually receiving breast milk, and the other group perhaps receiving just formula. This assigning the infants into different conditions, that's the manipulation of the variable. That's our independent variable, whether they had breast milk or formula. Our dependent variable then is going to be intelligence scores, which in this particular experiment, they will look at later on when they're at age 6. So they would keep track of those infants, and then later they would look at whether or not the children who received breast milk have higher intelligence scores than the children who received formula. So we've talked about the various types of research methods. We've talked about the descriptive method, the correlational method, and the experimental method. Each of these has strengths and weaknesses. Of course, the strength with descriptive method is that we're able to go out and observe behavior and describe that behavior. The weakness is going to be that you can't control any of the variables involved with that behavior. So we may not be able to talk about cause and effects. In fact, we can't talk about cause and effect because there is no manipulation of variables. And of course, if we rely upon the case study, we have to be careful because we're looking at a participant of one, and we're not able to generalize that information to others because it may not apply. In correlational research, we're able to look at the relationships that exist between variables, but again, the weakness is going to be that we can't talk about cause and effect because we're unable to manipulate variables. And with the experimental method, although we're able to talk about cause and effect because we can manipulate variables, there are some variables that it would be unethical for us to explore in an experiment. So we don't get to explore every single variable that there is. We're constrained by ethics. Sometimes people ask the question, how does studying something in an experiment really translate over to understanding human behavior? Well, even though the conditions are simplified in the experiment, what we're really interested in are theoretical principles. We come up with theoretical principles and we test them out in that setting, and it is those resulting principles that are what capture our interest, not so much the specific findings. Another issue that comes up is, why do we use animals for research? People wonder about that. Why are we using animals? What are the ethical guidelines around the use of animals? Well, as I mentioned before, research on animals allows us to study some variables that we're not able to study in human populations. So we're able to learn important things that we would not be able to learn because of the restrictions in working with human participants. Now, The American Psychological Association, APA, does have guidelines that apply to animal research. The main point of those guidelines are that we do not cause unnecessary harm to animals. Historically, people have thought of science as being highly objective. And one of the fallacies is that people have believed that this objectivity allows people to put their values aside. But in reality, our values are embedded within each of us as individuals, and they guide us towards the particular variables that we're interested in, the particular questions that we want to explore and to study. So although we do work to be as objective as possible, there is no such thing as a person who's so objective that they're not in the least influenced by their own values. Well, this is it. We've reached the end of our discussion of the scientific method. I hope that you have learned something that you'll be able to use in the future, and I look forward to seeing you soon.